The 7th lecture in our series English, Thought and Culture. Again, you know me, my name is Jake Organ and today we're going to be starting a series of 2 lectures on the English novel, and we're going to look at 2 particularly famous English novelists. Firstly, Jane Austen, and then secondly, Charles Dickens. Okay. So today's lecture is entitled Jane Austen and the British Class System. Okay. Again, here's the details of the course. Here's me, and if you notice, before we start talking about the English class system, what do you think that means at first? Class system. Well, as we'll learn, the class system is about, in England or Britain, where people are socially, which is a very, very important part of British, but especially English culture. Now notice that my name is Jake Organ, M.A. Cantab. Why is it not just Jake Organ, M.A.? When I say M.A. Cantab, it means I went to Cambridge University. Now, to any British person, or even any American person, that means an awful lot. Oh, he went to Cambridge, he's of a higher social class. The reality is, I'm probably not of a particularly high social class, but because I went to the top university in Britain and maybe in the world, that's how people will view me if I write that. So that's just a little thing about social class in England. It's a very, very important thing. Okay, so before we start the lecture, there's some points to consider. Remember, in the last lecture we started to talk about the Industrial Revolution. So before the start of the Industrial Revolution, and we remember the Industrial Revolution probably started about 1760, money was in the hands of the rural aristocracy, and established merchant families. Now, the aristocracy are people that live off ownership of land. They would have been given the title of some land by the king, maybe many hundreds of years ago, and they live off that land. They're people of inherited wealth, of old wealth, and established merchant families. So the upper classes were a very, very small group before the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution caused new sources of wealth to emerge. So through the Industrial Revolution, people from maybe a non-noble, a lower social class, suddenly started to have a lot of money. And as we'll discover, having a lot of money in the UK doesn't mean you're of a high social class. Being of a high social class is a lot about behaviour. It's about what you do. So many of these new families who had made money in the Industrial Revolutions tried to imitate, tried to copy the behaviour of the old rural aristocracy, because that's where class was. It was not about having lots of money, it was about having the manners and the culture of the old rural aristocracy, the people that made their money from the land, the establishedly wealthy, people that have been wealthy for maybe 200-300 years. That's what everyone wanted to be. So here, the British class system. Now, as an outsider to Britain, to English culture, there's probably a lot you don't understand. But I tell you, as an Englishman, within 5 minutes, or even within 1 minute, of meeting another Englishman, I can tell by his name, I can tell by his accent, I can tell by his manners what social class he is from. You know? And it's a very, very important part of British, but especially English culture. So the class system is very important in understanding British culture. Traditionally, there are 3 classes: the upper classes, the middle classes, and the working classes. These are the upper classes that tend to be the rulers, the middle classes that tend to be the managers and the administrators, and the working classes who tend to do the work, the physical work. And there is also an important distinction between the upper and lower middle classes. The upper middle classes will be trying to be upper class. The lower middle classes are different. And the upper and lower working classes. You know, you tend to have an upper working class that's trying to be middle class, that's respectable, and the lower working class that have their own culture. You know, maybe the Cockneys that you've seen on television, people from the inner cities. This would be the lower working classes. And this influences a person's name, accent, clothing and manner. You know, these things they're subtle, maybe you don't notice them as a foreigner, but they're very, very important in English culture. And often when you're looking at television programs or films set in the UK, set in England especially, there'll be this thing of class that's very important to it. Okay, there's many things we can talk about this, because this is a very big area, the English class system. But we talk about the 18th and 19th century upper class etiquette. Now, etiquette is a very important word. Etiquette basically means the rules of how you behave in a particular social situation. So the rules of how you behave in a particular social situation. Like, for example, there is a different rule that you have when you're meeting an old person. A different rule, there's different behaviour you need when you're meeting a young person. There's a particular behaviour you need when you're meeting a king or some member of the aristocracy, some noble. There are particular things you have to say, there's particular things you have to do. This is etiquette. So many writers in the 18th and 19th century talked about the life and etiquette of the upper classes. People were fascinated by this world of the upper classes. People wanted to know what the upper classes felt and were doing. So many writers wrote about this. So etiquette are the rules of how people should behave in a particular social situation. Novels of this era are often about how the upper classes and middle classes interact. You know, because a lot of people that were middle class, people that had made money in the Industrial Revolution, wanted to be in this upper class world. And there's often a a lot in novels about social climbing. People through marriage or through making money or through making themselves better in some way through education, wanted to come into this upper class world. And so a lot of 18th and 19th century novels are about this. There are many novels in this era about people from lower classes social climbing. Social climbing is an interesting word. It's about going up through the social classes. And it's always a dream that someone from a lower class or a middle class would then go into the upper classes and live the wonderful life of the upper classes. So sometimes this social climbing is a good thing, but also sometimes it's a bad thing, you know. Now, the writer we're going to look at today, Jane Austen, wrote in what is called Georgian England. So the period of time from 1714 to 1837 is called the Georgian era. Georgian era or Georgian age, Georgian period. Because it is the time of the reign of George I, George II, George III and George IV. Yeah, it's 4 kings, all called George. So the era is called the Georgian era. Remember, often ages are named after the particular king or queen or monarch, particular king or queen. Remember the Elizabethan era was an important time. Now we've got the Georgian era. It was a time of great stability, growth and change in British society. We've read about the Industrial Revolution started in this era. In fact, started and finished in this era. It was a time of the Industrial Revolution and the Romantic poets. So it's a time of change, but also a time of great creativity, as well as many famous writers, including Jane Austen. There were also many famous painters in this era, including John Constable, Thomas Gainsborough, and Sir Joshua Reynolds. So that's a very, very, it was a very creative time, not only in writing, but in painting. And nowadays we talk about Georgian architecture, meaning a particular way of building houses, especially among the upper classes. Okay. Now, Jane Austen is Jane Austen. She was born in 1775, died 1817. So not a long life, 42 years. Was an English novelist who wrote works of romantic fiction. She wrote works of romantic fiction, so it's a lot about love, marriage, sort of very universal themes. They were mainly set among the landed gentry of Georgian England. So again, the rural upper classes, the countryside. Rural means, or landed means countryside, sort of upper class people of England. Yeah, so we know the gentry, they lived on inherited wealth from ownership of land. Jane Austen is one of the most loved novelists in the English language. Very, very popular. Very popular. Her novels are very popular, and they have often been put into films, which are very popular. She is famous for Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility, Mansfield Park, Emma, Northanger Abbey and Persuasion. But it's these two, Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility, that are her real famous ones. Maybe for Sense and Sensibility, you might have seen a film in the 90s with Hugh Grant and Emma Thompson, which was a great sort of period drama that was very, very popular. So But her famous novel is Pride and Prejudice. It's about the universal themes of love and marriage. People falling in love and getting married. It's so much of literature and poetry is about this. The main characters are Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth Bennet, who overcome their pride and prejudice against each other to admit their love and get married, because they're people from slightly different social classes, and especially Mr. Darcy has to overcome his prejudice against the lower classes, and Elizabeth Bennet has to overcome her prejudice against the pride of the upper classes for them to admit their love and get married. The novel explores themes like social class, the role of women, and upper class hypocrisy. Now, hypocrisy is a very important word, and it's often something associated with the English and the English upper classes, that they will say one thing, but really they'll be feeling something very different. And this can be hypocrisy. There was a TV version of Pride and Prejudice released in 1995 that became very popular all over the world. This was the most talked about programme of the 90s. Everyone loved it, and it caused this whole thing of the period drama, the drama or television programmes set in the 19th or 18th century. It caused it to become popular again, and things like Downton Abbey and many things that have been very popular across the world came from this 1995 TV series. There was also, maybe you saw, and I recommend you see it, there was a 2005 film version which starred Keira Knightley and Matthew McFadden, which brought the whole story to a new generation. And it really is that's a very wonderful, very gentle film. It's well worth looking at. Okay, so I recommend that you read Pride and Prejudice, but it's a long novel. But if you can watch the film, the 2005 film with Keira Knightley, who was the major star in that really captures a lot of the book. Okay, let's look at the something of the actual novel. The famous first sentence is it's very, it starts off the novel Pride and Prejudice, and it basically talks of the whole theme of Pride and Prejudice. It says, "It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife." That's the famous opening sentence of Pride and Prejudice. So, yeah, that's true. That's what it's all about. These men that have found some wealth, have got some wealth, have got a good home. Obviously, they're looking to get married, and very much it's about the whole etiquette, you remember the rules of behaviour around courtship. In 18th and 19th century English society, the way you approached your partner or someone you loved or someone you cared for was very, very important. You had to do it right, and your families had to be involved. Sometimes your families would try to organise it. It's different it's different from how it is today. So this is what it's all about. Here, the second one. Vanity and pride are different things, though the words are often used synonymously. They're often said to be the same word, but she's saying they're different words. A person may be proud without being vain. Pride relates more to our opinion of ourselves. Vanity to what we would have others think of us. So that's a very important distinction. And this is Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice is very much about psychology. Jane Austen, the writer, explores a lot of her characters' psychology in the novel. And Elizabeth is very clever. Elizabeth Bennet, the main female lead, is very, very clever. And she comes out with very clever observations. It says here, this is a bit of the humour. A lady's imagination is very rapid. It jumps from admiration to love, from love to matrimony, from love to marriage in a moment. Again, this is a slightly humorous view of just life, because a lot of these novels were about observing life, you know, and these are universal things. Now, this is a very, very important thing. For what do we live but to make sport for our neighbours and laugh at them in our turn? Now this is all about the area of gossip. Gossip and hypocrisy. Basically they're saying, why are we living except to, you know, basically make sport for our neighbours? So we're living so they can gossip about us and say bad things about us, and then we can gossip about them and say bad things about them. So, you know, this is an example of Jane Austen's observation of upper class life, showing the hypocrisy, showing just pushing away the silliness of upper class life. Again, here is Elizabeth again, says, till this moment I never knew myself. And Pride and Prejudice, it's a great novel because it's very much about self-understanding. It's about coming to know yourself. And Jane Austen is observing this world that may seem a little bit empty, it may seem a little bit silly to the outsider. But in this world, people are developing and coming to know themselves. So that's an important line in the psychological growth of Elizabeth throughout the story. And another famous line from Pride and Prejudice: "We are all fools in love." And this is one of Jane Austen's observations on love. Yeah, we're all fools in love. Love makes us foolish, which I think we can all understand from whatever culture we're from. Now, the story ends happily with the two characters admitting their love for each other, and Elizabeth agreeing to marry Darcy. Okay, so it's a very, very happy ending after a lot of very sort of difficult things happen in the book. There's a very, very happy ending, and Elizabeth says afterwards, because the whole story is that Mr. Darcy comes from a very, very rich family. Not from the aristocracy, but from an established merchant family, a very rich family. And Elizabeth is like just a sort of the rural middle class, just at the very bottom. They're not working class, they're probably not lower middle class, but they're from a quite humble background. But Elizabeth says to Darcy, you know, because obviously Darcy, this rich man, everyone wants to marry him. But Elizabeth says, you are disgusted with the women who are always speaking and looking and thinking for your approbation alone. Basically, women that were just trying to you know, act in such a way as to get him to be always complimenting him, just acting so they can impress him. I brought up and interested you because I was so unlike them. And that's the thing, Elizabeth is her own character. Elizabeth is her own person. You know, often in very, very polite social situations, all the different people will be acting in one way, but Elizabeth will be acting in a different way. And she's the hero or the heroine, the female hero of the story is called a heroine. She is the heroine of the story, you know. And Jane Austen, through that, is in a way being a little bit critical of the English social class system, and also just saying about sort of women who have to act in a certain way is not so good. It's good for people to, in a sense, express themselves and to be themselves. That's part of Austen's philosophy. Now, this is going to be part of your discussion questions, but I believe this is an important thing for you to think about. The English class system, the British class system. Now think about famous British people that you know. I don't know what famous British people you know. I don't know, someone like David Beckham, someone like the Queen, someone like David Cameron. What social class do you think they are from? What social class are, for example, Wayne Rooney, the Queen, or David Beckham from? Why do you think that? Now, this is important. Maybe you see English people that speak with a very, very upper class accent. They will talk, "Hello, I'm English, how are you?" Now this is usually an upper class person. You'll see other English people that you'll maybe meet in London who'll say, "Hello mate, how's it going? Alright, you good? Right, hey." Again, both English, but from a very different social class. You know, so some of the English people you've seen, maybe you've seen films of a man like Jason Statham, who does a lot of action films. He's an English person. Think of his accent, think of the way he acts. What social class do you think he is from? And, you know, why do you think that? Now, I also recommend that you watch, you can see Pride and Prejudice on YouTube. Try to read something about it, and try to maybe read the beginning of the novel. And read some of these things about Pride and Prejudice. Look at the psychology of especially this second quote. Vanity and pride are different things. Vanity is something outward. Pride is something inward. You know? Though the words are often used synonymously. A person may be proud without being vain. Pride relates more to our opinion of ourselves, and it's good to have a positive opinion of yourself. But vanity is about what we want others to think of us. So that's an important sort of psychological thing there. You know, and it shows that this novel was not just talking about what was happening outwardly in upper class society and middle class society, but it's also talking about what was happening inwardly in the thoughts and hearts of people. And here, where it says, till this moment, I never knew myself. Again, another very important part, another very important part of psychology, the search for meaning, the search for self-understanding. Some say that all great works of art, or great novels, or great stories, are about man or woman's search for themselves, search for self-understanding. And here, Elizabeth has found herself, has found self-knowledge, not through some great adventure, but just through normal upper-class life. Some would say quite a boring life. But through it, and through experiencing this man, Mr. Darcy, and having to overcome her prejudices against him, she's discovered herself. And the novel Pride and Prejudice is also classic because it's about the just universal theme of most great stories, and of course that is love. Love. And it says we are all fools in love, but it's a wonderful story in the sense that it has a happy ending, and that the characters come together, and they get married and hopefully live happily ever after. So that's why it's such a popular and wonderful story. So in a sense, though it's your classical happy ending story, it's also very deep with the psychology of it. So thank you very much, and this is the end of this lecture about Jane Austen and the British class system, and I hope to see you in the next lecture, which will be about Charles Dickens. Thank you.